Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 27th of March. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 397 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. Vladimir Zelensky has visited the partially occupied region of Zaporizhia, where he met with the nuclear chief Rafael Grossi from the UN. The head of the UN's nuclear agency said that they had a rich exchange on the protection of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine's ground forces commander, Colonel General Alexander Syrsky, said today that his troops were continuing to repel heavy Russian attacks on the eastern city of Bakhmut, and that defending it was a military necessity. Ukraine has accused Russia of destabilizing Belarus and making its smaller neighbor into a nuclear hostage, after Vladimir Putin's announcement that Moscow has made a deal to station tactical nuclear weapons on Belarusian territory. At least 2 people have been killed in a Russian missile strike on the eastern city of Sloviansk today. That's according to the regional governor. The attack left 29 others wounded, Pavlo Kirilenko, head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration, said. Russian forces launched 2 missile strikes, 23 airstrikes, and 38 rocket attacks from rocket salvo systems against Ukrainian troops and infrastructure in populated areas, according to the latest update from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Poland has detained a foreign citizen on charges of spying for Russia, prosecutors said earlier today. A Ukrainian court has sentenced a Russian-appointed social worker in the liberated eastern city of Liman to 5 years in prison after finding her guilty of collaborating with Russian authorities. Belarus is accusing Poland of heightening tensions between the country and the EU by deliberately slowing the movement of trucks and cars at its border. And yesterday, President Zelensky urged all Ukrainians to remain engaged with the developments in the war, even though fighting is largely now concentrated in the east. Heavy Russian shelling is turning the Ukrainian town of Avdiivka into a place from apocalyptic movie, according to the city's military administration head, Vitaly Barabash. The number of Russian troops in Belarus has decreased to around 4,000, according to Ukraine. Andriy Demchenko, spokesperson for the State Border Guard Service, said that there had been 10,000 in January. And in a televised interview yesterday, Vladimir Putin said that Russia and China were not creating a military alliance. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by Maureen Watt, who's a retired politician and former Minister for Mental Health in the Scottish Government. Maureen served as a regional MSP for North East Scotland from 2006 until 2011, and was then a member of our Scottish Parliament, representing the constituency of Aberdeen South and North Kincardine from 2011 until 2021, when she was lucky enough to retire. Maureen has also been a teacher and a counsellor, amongst many other roles. Maureen, good evening. It's great to see you. How are you keeping?
Good evening, Andrew. I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
You've had a busy day, I understand.
It's been a busy day, but tip-top on a Monday evening, and we're delighted that you're able to join us on Broadcasting Scotland to help us look at the headlines, particularly from Scotland today, but also from around the world. Because at Murrayfield Stadium in Edinburgh earlier today, the SNP announced the winner of the party's first leadership contest in 18 years. After more than 4 weeks of campaigning, the SNP National Secretary, Lorna Finn, announced the results at a press conference. 50,494 members out of an eligible membership of 72,169 participated in the election, a turnout of 70%. There were 3 spoilt ballot papers. In the first ballot result, Ash Regan had received 5,599 votes, that's 11.1%. Kate Forbes, 20,559, that's 40.7%. And Hamza Yusuf, 24,336, that's 48.2%. because no candidate managed to secure more than 50% of the first preference votes. The second ballot was then looked at, which told us that Kate Forbes received 23,890 second ballot results, 47.9%, and Hamza Yusuf received 26,032 second votes, that's 52.1%. In his acceptance speech, Hamza Yusuf said that he felt humbled and that he felt like the luckiest man in the world to be the SNP leader. He said that the late John Smith got it right, he said. All we ask is the chance to serve. Mr. Yusuf said he would lead the SNP in the interests of all members, not just those who voted for him. And he said he would be First Minister, if appointed, for all of Scotland. The Scottish Parliament will vote to appoint a new First Minister tomorrow, at which Hamza Yusuf is expected to be endorsed by the Parliament as the sixth First Minister of Scotland, with the backing of MSPs both from the SNP and the Scottish Greens. So, Maureen, in the short run, Hamza Yusuf's election as SNP leader will help steady the nerves of many SNP parliamentarians. He was clearly their choice, and the one that they hoped that members would make too. A number of those had been critical of the socially conservative views expressed by Kate Forbes, and as a result, some might have been uncomfortable serving under her leadership. Hamza Yusuf, in contrast, should have little difficulty in marshalling his parliamentary troops, and the Greens will be happy with his election and are likely to remain in the Scottish Government coalition. So in the short run, his election as leader will help steady the nerves. Yet, when the celebrations are over, I wonder if a more sober mood might emerge. In truth, the overwhelming lead that perhaps Hamza Yusuf started with in terms of endorsements from MPs and MSPs, the eventual vote, 52% in favour, 48% for Kate, once the votes for Ash Regan had been redistributed, was very, very close. So polls conducted during the campaign have already revealed that Hamza Yusuf had limited appeal for those outside the SNP, and I suppose you could argue now that on the voting today, he doesn't appear especially popular inside the party either. So he's going to have to craft and sell a persuasive case. Otherwise, independence will continue to be regarded by some as rather an elusive goal. So, and of course, that is something, it was pointed out by a number of the journalists asking questions, that securing independence is a particularly elusive, has been an elusive goal, something that perhaps even his predecessors were ultimately unable to do. So, in very general terms, to start us this evening, Maureen, how do you rate Mr. Yusuf's chances of securing the currently rather elusive goal of independence for Scotland?
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Hamza on his victory. I think he ran a very good campaign, a very positive campaign, and I'm glad to see that he has won. I think the campaign itself will have been very good for all of the candidates because they have been going round the country, having hustings, meeting people, and more importantly, hearing their views at these hustings. They took loads and loads of questions. So I think that the candidates will reflect on what they've heard from the membership throughout the country and build on that. But the SNP is great at coming together behind the leader once they're chosen, and I'm sure that will happen this time. Yes, perhaps the vote was closer than Hamza would have liked, but I'm sure that he will be out in the country again shortly, making sure that the party does unite behind him. I'm sure that we'll come together soon as a party, and he will be able to set out how he intends to do that, and I very much look forward to that.
Thanks, Maureen. And we'll look at a number of the issues and the aspects of the campaign and the election and the future this evening together, if that's okay with you. And the first thing that struck me standing at Murrayfield this afternoon was that in his acceptance speech, Mr. Youssef used a Scottish Rugby Union slogan. He was Murrayfield is bedecked with the slogan "As One," which is also used by the SRU in social media. And he used the same language. He said, "Where there are divisions to heal, we must do so quickly," adding that one of his first conversations as leader would be with his former rivals, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan, to reunite Team SNP. And he added, "We are no longer Team Humza, Team Ash, or Team Kate. We are one team, and we will be the generation that delivers independence for Scotland." So, in general terms, you've touched on the coming together of party members already, but just how big a task do you think that healing is that will clearly need to be done?
I don't think it's going to be that big within the party. I suppose, in a way, it depends on how much attention is focused on those people who say they're for independence, but um, continue to be the most critical of the SNP government. I think that the party will unite behind Hamza. I think that it's important that our opponents realise that the SNP is about independence. We are the Scottish National Party, and our main aim, as on our membership cards, is to gain the independence for Scotland. Now, we can see that the Westminster government is totally anti-democratic in that it won't recognise Scotland's wish for another referendum and has blocked any referendum. And I think that it's really important, as one of the commentators I think it was the BBC that I was watching today, Leslie Riddick, said that the independence is a movement in Scotland. And it's really important that the movement, of which, of course, the SNP as a party is the head of, and obviously the government, and it's only as an SNP government that we can move forward with independence. But I think it's really important that the independence movement is galvanised and working from the grassroots up to create that momentum to get the polls and the feeling in Scotland that there is a real groundswell who want independence for Scotland and see it as the way to revitalise our economy, to create a more fair and just society, and to create an economy based on well-being of all, not just a few, as we're suffering under the Westminster Tory government. So I know most of the candidates have, during the campaign, spoken to many groups, pro-independence groups, and I think it's important that that is now galvanised, and as I say, that there's a groundswell for independence built up.
Thanks, Maureen. And you've answered another thing that was in the back of my mind. I had some people who've been talking about Leslie Riddick appearing on something today and how she was on a panel with Isabel Hardman, Baroness Walney, who writes for The Spectator, which sounded not a very pleasant experience. Anyway, to look again a little bit at this team point, and then we'll move on. Having just discussed the as one team point, there was a statement from Ash Regan this afternoon. She said, "Ash Regan believes that while unity is essential, the party must also engage in open and honest discussions about its policies and future direction. She urges Humza Yousaf to create an inclusive environment where all party members' voices are heard and valued, fostering a culture of transparency and accountability." She went on, "As the SNP progresses under Humza Yousaf's leadership, Ash Regan and her team remain committed to supporting the party in advancing the cause of Scottish independence and addressing the crucial issues of the NHS crisis, cost of living, and promoting social justice in Scotland." I did scrutinise that quite carefully because it struck me as a little bit odd. Ash Regan and her team. I thought it was now one team, Team SNP. So is there something in that, or is this just another example of Ash contradicting herself again?
Well, I think everybody noticed Ash's face when the results were being announced, her surly attitude when Hamza was announced as leader, not shaking his hand readily and looking pretty glum. So what will happen with Ash and her team, I don't know. But if she's not prepared to become part of one team and one SNP, then I think she will get short shrift. I don't subscribe to the view that people can't express their views in the SNP. There are loads of people who come to branch meetings and express their views, which, for those of us, for example, on the NEC are passed forward right away, and which our elected representatives pass on to the leadership as well. So I don't subscribe to that view. I don't think that there should be massive changes in policy. We were elected on a manifesto. They were elected on a manifesto in 2021, which they all subscribe to. We all subscribe to, and I think that should be taken forward. I think there may be a change of focus in some ways. But I also think that there will be, I think, as Hamza himself said, a bigger tent. So there is lots of work to do within the SNP. There's no one denying that, both in the parliamentary groups and also on the NEC. And we're already working on that. And I think things will come better and together much more quickly than perhaps our opponents and the mainstream media would like to think.
Thank you, Maureen. That's a very good point. Now, one other aspect of the announcement, the press conference being held at Murrayfield today, struck me. In his speech, Hamza Yusuf spoke about working with the grassroots on the doors as part of campaigning. Now, I know from my own experience that while the leadership election was going on, there was also a council by-election in Murrayfield. The stadium, there was a council by-election in that ward. And there was only one of the three candidates who volunteered to go with the grassroots and to work on the doors one night, and that was Hamza Yusuf. So does that suggest to you that in addition to saying he wants to he'll be working with the grassroots on the doors, does this suggest that he will literally walk the walk as well as talking the talk?
Well, I think he said, as well as wanting to become First Minister and leader of the party, he wanted to become first activist. And I think he will stick by that. Look, Nicola was a fantastic campaigner, an absolutely fantastic campaigner. I had her in my constituency, and people were following her up the street. When they heard from their neighbours that she was in the street, they were coming over to the next street that we'd moved on to. She was an absolutely fantastic campaigner, but Hamza is too. And I'm sure, he said that when thanking his family that they may not see very much of him, but that he will be thinking of them always and be with them as much as possible. But I think he will be on the doorsteps campaigning and leading campaigns, which is the kind of boost, I think, that local activists really want to see, and will be really pleased to see him out on the doorsteps with us.
Certainly, that's a very good point, Maureen. If nothing else, Ms Sturgeon's campaigning and her, as you say, her magnetic attraction for voters and passers-by, and particularly young people, was quite remarkable. So we'll see how Mr Yusuf gets on once he's on the streets. But as you say, he's been in politics for a very long time, and so has plenty of experience in that aspect of what is going to be a multifaceted and very challenging job. But one other aspect I wanted to touch with you about was the extent to which it is or is not significant that Mr Yusuf will be the first Muslim First Minister. Indeed, some people are suggesting this afternoon that he may be the first Muslim leader of any country in the Western world. Now, I suppose that depends on how you view Turkey, but certainly the election of leaders who are Muslim is very unusual in the Western world. So, how significant do you think it is? He was born in Scotland. So in a sense, so in every sense, he's Scottish. But what as a general point, and I'll dig into this a little bit further in a minute, but as a general point, how significant do you think it is?
I think it's very significant. I mean, with Nicola, we had the first female First Minister, which was absolutely great. And I think it's absolutely brilliant for Scotland to show how multicultural and hopefully inclusive we are, that we have the first Muslim First Minister of Scotland. I've no doubt there will be detractors on social media, but I think it's absolutely great. We have Rishi Sunak as the first Indian um, Prime Minister, and I think it's great that we're showing now that the whole of the UK is multicultural, and I hope we can build on that. I think it's really great that Hamza is the first Muslim First Minister in Scotland. It shows a really inclusive society, and I hope that people can see that and think that it's a great thing for Scotland.
Thanks, Maureen. And you make a good point. I'll need to go and investigate. Obviously, Mr. Yusuf's family heritage is from the Pakistan side of the Punjab. I do not know where Rishi Sunak's family are from in India, but it strikes me that you've got two sides of the border there and two sides of the border here as well. But I will go and get some facts around that before I say any more. But just to enlarge a little bit on what you were saying, and you very much picked up the point I was going to talk to you about. There are some on the unionist side who were triggered, to use a current colloquialism. That is, they were automatically angered by the simple fact that the elected leader of our country was a woman with a working class background. Now, we're now discussing one of the very first Muslim leaders of any country in the Western world. Do you think that triggering, that automatic pre-programmed anger, do you think that will get better or worse because rather than a working class woman, the next leader of the country is likely to be a Muslim man?
Oh, for goodness sake. The fact that we're even discussing this shows you how important social media has become. I think people need to get over themselves, concentrate on the issues and the policies rather than on the person. And I think the fact that Hamza has said that he's going to be more inclusive, perhaps listen to more of his ministers and cabinet secretaries, have more people around him influencing him and listening to him than perhaps Nicola did. I think all bodes well. And I noticed, for example, Amar Anwar in the audience today congratulating Hamza. I think the fact that not only his family but other Muslims were there supporting him and congratulating him really bodes well for Scotland. I hope they feel more included today than perhaps they did yesterday, and that we can all build on that, not just for Muslims, but people of all faiths and nationalities who choose to come and live in Scotland. It's as Bashir Ahmed said, our first Muslim MSP, it's not where you've come from to Scotland, but how you want to see Scotland going forward. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but that was his sentiment, and I think we all should be looking to how we want to take Scotland forward and not looking back to where people have come from.
Thanks, Maureen. That's a very good point. And social media, absolutely. I suspect on the football terraces as well. But your point's well made. And having looked at that, and there's a little bit in asking the question, there's a little bit about reflecting on Scotland as well in my mind. But the point you make is very well made. So we'll move on. It's been pointed out at length, and it's a matter of fact that Hamza Yusuf, through his political career, has held some of the most tricky briefs, not least because those briefs actually involve delivering something tangible, something that you'll appreciate from your own experience as a minister. His opponents, both unionists and, it has to be said, Kate Forbes, have latched onto that. Now, we know that our good friend at Broadcasting Scotland, Professor John Robertson, works tirelessly to correct the lazy, ill-informed, or downright deceitful way in which unionists and their clients in the mainstream media talk down public services in Scotland, and of course talk down, and I would also say talk down the thousands of people who work in those services. So apart from hiring Professor Robertson, and I don't think you can hire him, but apart from hiring John Robertson, what else do you think that the new party leader needs to do in order to address the constant flow of bad news and SNP bad spin?
Well, I think the whole party should take the opportunity of a change of leader to perhaps reflect on whether they've been doing things as well as they could in terms of putting across our message. I think that sometimes, personally, and I haven't really discussed that with anybody, but I think there needs to be more. Well, I hope that the mainstream media will continue to cover press releases and information that comes from the government. But I think that there's a bigger role for the party to put forward, to put out press releases and say what, as a party, the Scottish National Party is doing as a party, kind of separating it a bit from the government. So I think we need to reflect on that and perhaps have a change of emphasis on where some of the information that is coming from the SNP is seen as different from that from the government. I'm thinking perhaps of policy making that the party does. Obviously, conferences are covered, but I do think there might be a bit more opportunity for the SNP to put the message forward on independence, which, because the First Minister is for all of Scotland and speaks as for the government, may not be possible to do. So I think I get the impression that Hamza is going to make much more use of not just cabinet secretaries and ministers, but perhaps also office bearers in the party itself.
Thanks, Maureen. That's good insight, and certainly I would agree that that's been the indication that we've been hearing from him. Certainly the mood music. And just finally, I wondered whether there were any other changes that you think that the new party leader could or should be making to the party machine. I'm thinking that the columnist for the National and campaigner Leslie Riddick congratulated him this afternoon, but said lessons should be learned. She said that the SNP needs genuine policy debate, internal democracy, boldness in rebuttal, and better public communications. So she said it was good to hear of the grassroots indie campaign, but that needs resources and involvement by the new leader. So do you think that there are other changes that he should perhaps pursue? And also, do you expect him, and I think you do, but do you expect him to be playing an even greater role in him or others who he appoints, playing a greater part in grassroots campaigning for independence?
Well, I think we've already spoken about him being first activist, and I think he will be more involved in grassroots campaigning. Leslie Riddick obviously expressed much better what I just said in my last answer to you, and I hadn't heard her say that, so we're on the same page there. But I think the fact that the chief executive has also gone gives us an opportunity to revitalise the work that headquarters does, and also revitalises the work of the National Executive Committee, and perhaps there needs to be a change of personnel throughout the staff at head. So I'm glad that Mike Russell has taken on the job of interim chief executive. I'm sure he will do what needs to be done, and that will obviously come out in the coming weeks and months.
Thanks, Maureen. And that's a good point that you make about Mike Russell. You could tell that he is somebody who the unionists are worried about. It took Murdo Fraser all of 45 minutes before Murdo was asking for Mike Russell to resign. So you can see he's doing something good there. Maureen, that's been great. Thank you for all of your thoughts and reflection on the result of the leadership election today. That's been really helpful. And I hope we've managed to put a bit more meat on the bones of reporting and discussion, which, as you say, in the mainstream press can be a bit one-sided and a bit a little partisan, shall we say. But let's move on now, because Keir Starmer is expected to confirm at tomorrow's National Executive Committee of the Labour Party that Jeremy Corbyn will not be allowed to stand as a Labour MP at the next general election. The Labour leader will propose a motion that makes it clear that the party's ruling body will not endorse Corbyn as a Labour candidate for the Westminster election expected sometime next year. Starmer first confirmed the move last month as he marked an important moment for the Labour Party after the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, lifted the party out of special measures over its past failings on anti-Semitism. Corbyn hit back by saying that Starmer had broken his commitment to respect the rights of Labour members and denigrated the party's democratic foundations. Resisting calls to declare whether he will stand as an independent candidate, Corbyn said in a statement, as the government plunges millions into poverty and demonises refugees, Keir Starmer has focused his opposition on those demanding a more progressive and humane alternative. In a clear mark of growing confidence, Starmer has also invited Labour MPs who have long supported Corbyn to leave the party if they do not agree with his stance on driving out anti-Semitism. At the time, Corbyn accused his successor of a flagrant attack on the democratic rights of Islington North Party members, saying it was for them, not party leaders, to decide who their candidate should be at the next election. So, Maureen, it doesn't sound very democratic. The leader of the party badging members of the party as not suitable for endorsement as election candidates.
Well, I have to say I'm a bit confused about what Keir Starmer is doing. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn has been put out of the parliamentary party and is standing and sits in the House of Commons as an independent. That surely means that his party membership has been revoked as well, I would have thought. So how can they be Islington North be thinking about choosing Jeremy Corbyn as a Labour candidate? It doesn't seem to add up to me. If Jeremy Corbyn stands as an independent in Islington North, then I suppose that could be a problem for the Labour Party and its chances in Islington North. I haven't looked at the figures, but Jeremy Corbyn is not any spring chicken. Has he indicated whether he wants to stand again at the next general election? And the other thing that strikes me, Andrew, apart from this being a bit of grandstanding, I think, by Keir Starmer, shows to me that perhaps Jeremy Corbyn excluded, he seems to think that there is still some anti-Semitism in his party, which doesn't bode well for his party. We've been talking about having a Muslim as our party leader now, and if the Labour Party are still experiencing anti-Semitism within the party, then that is a real problem for them. And clearly bringing this up again, he shows that it's still a problem for him. And as I say, is something that is not going to bode well for him at the next general election.
Thanks, Maureen. I couldn't give you the polling numbers for the voting numbers for Jeremy Corbyn, but he's been the MP for Islington North since 1983. So it struck me if he wants to continue being an MP, he would simply stand as an independent, and with that that length of record of service in the constituency, he'll probably just get elected, won't he?
Yes, possibly. Yeah, yeah.
Well, we shall
I
see. I
mean,
think
you,
he's maybe
you
been
can never tell with these. Normally, when people leave a party and stand as an independent, they don't get elected. So it
yes.
does depend on how big his personal vote is, and I have no way of gauging that at all.
No, that's a very good point. If history teaches us anything, those who leave parties are seldom re-elected as independents. That's a very good point. Thanks, Maureen. And we'll move on now because the new UK immigration bill that aims to stop migrants crossing the English Channel on small boats from France is incompatible with the UK's international obligations, Europe's top rights body said today. In a letter addressed to both chambers of the UK Parliament, the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, Dunja Mijatovic, urged MPs and Lords to vote against the bill proposed by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's right-wing Conservative government. It is now essential that lawmakers prevent legislation that is incompatible with the UK's international obligations being passed, Ms Mijatovic said in the letter. The draft law intends to outlaw asylum claims by all, quote, illegal, unquote, arrivals, while anyone who is deported after making the dangerous journey from France would be banned from re-entering the UK permanently. By effectively preventing people arriving irregularly from having their asylum claims assessed, the bill would strip away one of the essential building blocks of the protection system, said Ms Mijatovic. If passed, the bill would add to the already significant regression of the protection of human rights of refugees, asylum seekers and migrants in the UK, and it would provide an incentive to other states in Europe and beyond to adopt similar measures, she said. The UK remains a member of the Council of Europe, which is a separate entity from the European Union, and the UK is still required to abide by the European Convention on Human Rights, which is overseen by the ECHR. Ms Mijatovic said the bill would create a clear and direct tension with the human rights standards established under the European Convention on Human Rights. Provisions in the bill indicating that domestic legislation would supersede the European Convention on Human Rights risk creating divergence with the case law of the ECHR, she said. Already, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, said earlier this month that he was deeply concerned by the legislation. So, Maureen, the current very right-wing Tory government doesn't much care about working with other nations. It took us out of the EU against our will. And it doesn't seem that bothered about meeting legal obligations in lots of ways either. So do you think the risk in reality is that this letter from the Council of Europe is simply going to be, by the Home Secretary, is simply going to file it in the circular filing cabinet on the floor?
Well, interestingly, the letter was sent to both houses of Parliament. So I presume that's to the speakers of both houses, who, if I were in their position, I would feel obliged to circulate it to all members of both houses. But you're right, Andrew. This current very, very right-wing government doesn't care a damn about what international commentators or people think about them. They are just hell-bent on pulling the UK so far to the right that, you know, if it was any other place, any other country, there would, you know, even the UK would be in outrage, but they can't see it themselves, really. Sorry, I'm not putting that very well, but I think you maybe get my drift. So, yes, they do not care about what people say internationally. They are hell-bent on attracting, well, on sowing division. So Brexit has been done. So they have to find another way of sowing division and in our country in order to create chaos, and out of that chaos think that they will continue to govern. It's really an awful situation for a country to be in, and that we are experiencing it ourselves is just awful. And given the fact that the mainstream media are compliant in all of this, I mean, you would hope in a democratic country that you would have a bit of the mainstream media that would be outraged by this, but it just seems totally and utterly voiceless. Or any opposition to this is voiceless, and the official opposition, the Labour Party, are so uh, keen, obviously, in getting into power that they don't want to upset any apple carts, and any principles that you would expect from a Labour Party seem to have gone out the window. So it is a really dire situation that the UK finds itself in, which is why, I hope Hamza focuses on this and shows that the UK is totally out of step with the vast majorities of countries throughout the world. That this drift to the right is not acceptable on the international stage. I mean, you can look at how Joe Biden doesn't like what's happening in the UK. So yeah, it's a but in the end of the day, they have an 80-seat majority. I'm sure it will go through the House of Commons because of that 80-seat majority, and I suppose it does rely on the House of Lords putting forward amendments and hoping when it gets back to the Commons that some of these will be taken on board, but I don't hold out much hope for that. So it really is an awful situation to find the UK in my opinion.
Thanks, Maureen, and certainly, yes, a distinct lack of self-awareness, perhaps, and perspective. But interestingly, we're going to continue discussing hypocrisy and the right-wing client media because the Daily Mail's parent company has successfully invoked the Human Rights Act to stop other media outlets naming its journalists in a phone hacking case. Prince Harry and a group of other prominent individuals are bringing cases alleging widespread illegal behaviour by reporters at associated newspapers. In their claims, they named 73 journalists and editorial executives who have worked at the Daily Mail and its sister titles over several decades. Lawyers working for the Daily Mail said publishing the names would breach the journalists' right to a fair trial under the Human Rights Act. This is despite the Mail long using its editorial pages to campaign against that European-derived legislation. Barrister David Sherborne, representing Harry and other claimants at the High Court, noted it was surprising to see a newspaper that has campaigned for press freedom and now objecting to the publication of these names. He said, they say different rules apply to their journalists suspected of wrongdoing as opposed to others suspected of wrongdoing. The allegations against the Mail's parent company mainly relate to a period from 1993 to 2011, with some claims relating to events that actually took place as recently as 2018. The Mail is attempting to stop the claims before trial on two grounds. Firstly, that the claims are stale because the prominent individuals waited too long to bring their cases, which largely relate to events that took place more than a decade ago. And secondly, that the allegations rely on material provided by associated newspapers to the Leveson inquiry into press ethics, which the company therefore believes should be restricted from use in this legal case. Maureen, Catherine Evans, KC, acting for Associated Newspapers, successfully argued that there was no justification for publication of these names at this stage. She told the court that publication of the names would cause immense reputational damage to the 73 individuals who worked for the Mail. Now, I'm sorry, these people's reputations are as people who write for the Daily Mail. How can you conceivably do any damage to someone who has that reputation?
Well, unfortunately, Andrew, an awful lot of people read the Daily Mail for various reasons. I think it is one of the UK's best-selling newspapers. But is this not utter hypocrisy or not? They obviously have a very good lawyer, but you couldn't really make it up, could you? That a newspaper that campaigns against human rights law is now using that very legislation to protect its journalists. I hope that perhaps some organisation within or without the UK manages to print a list of these journalists somewhere or another. And if they're not held in utter contempt already, that they will be after that. So we will wait and see. I think, on a lighter note, I think they were all caught on the hop today when Prince Harry turned up to go to court. So no doubt we'll see a lot of it reported in the mainstream media.
Yes, I don't know if Hello Magazine has a legal correspondent, but you never know. It may be appointing one any day now. Thank you, Maureen. We'll move on now because the UK energy companies forcibly installed 94,000 prepayment meters using warrants in 2022, with Scottish Power and British Gas ordering the most, according to UK government data. The UK government has been trying to distance itself from the practice of forcible installations of prepayment meters, which are generally used by energy companies for customers who have missed payments in the past. Forcible installations have come under particular scrutiny during the energy crisis, triggered by the removal of coronavirus pandemic restrictions and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which raised prices significantly and has forced 2 million English households into fuel poverty in 2022. In February, the government reached an agreement with suppliers to halt forced installations following concerns that the rules to protect vulnerable households were being ignored. The head of the UK energy regulator, Ofgem, this month told MPs a ban on forced installations would remain until a code of practice has been established. 3 companies were responsible for 70% of all forced installations. They were Scottish Power, which is of course owned by Spain's Iberdrola, British Gas, which is part of the FTSE 100 firm Centrica, and OVO, which took over Scottish and Southern Energy SSE's home energy business in 2019. Scottish Power was the worst offender when taking into account their customer base, with 24,300 installations, the government said. That represents more than 500 installations per 100,000 metre points. So, Maureen, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero published this data on its website under a banner reading, "Not Good Enough." And the Energy Secretary, Grant Shapps, the English Energy Secretary, Grant Shapps, said the figures were horrifying in a statement. Now, I hate to be agreeing with Grant Shapps, or maybe he's still millionaire web marketer Michael Green on the weekend, but I hate to be agreeing with him, but is he right? Are these horrifying? And I'm also reminded for a moment that it was the Tories who privatised the supply of electricity in this country, so why would he be horrified? This is exactly what privatising public utilities does, isn't it?
Well, in a way, yes. I mean, privatising energy, I think, which was done under Thatcher, was one of the worst things that happened in this country, and its privatisation agenda has been going forward ever since. But I mean, just let's think about this for a minute. It's forced entry by private companies working on behalf of these private energy companies. Now, in any civilized society, that surely must be outlawed. And I'm glad that the ban is being kept in place. It will be forever, no question. And the law needs to change on that because Ofgem doesn't seems well. I think it's a toothless body in many ways and in many things that it does. So the government could maybe be concentrating on putting a law through saying that this is practice which cannot continue, and measures must be put in place to make sure that people are not forcibly made to pay £1.10 for every unit of energy compared to the £1. I mean, I'm generalizing, but they're paying 10% more for energy. The poorest are paying at least 10% more for energy than those that are on smart meters or other methods of payment. It just shows you how the Tory government do not care about the unjust, unfair, hidden taxes, but not hidden, but you know what I mean, taxes on the poorest in our society. And that really, really must change. It is so archaic.
Thanks, Maureen. And yes, the odd position of the private utility company, electricity companies, with a mixture of rights to enter people's houses, which are really are a hangover to the previous nationalised industry, that now are very clearly an anachronism and a confusion, and as you say, are going to have to be revised and refreshed fundamentally. But let's move on to our final item now, because a community hub in South Uist is to be extended, providing more education and social opportunities to local residents. The Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, undertook his final ministerial engagement today by chairing the Convention of Highlands and Islands, the COHI, which he has chaired on every occasion it has met since the current government was elected in 2007. The convention took place at the community hub, which the Deputy First Minister formally opened in September 2022. The modern facility hosts a range of events, including Gaelic education and music, and provides a base for activities run by the University of the Highlands and Islands, Outer Hebrides. It has now been granted a further £2 million by the Scottish Government for Phase 2 of the project, comprising the construction of an auditorium accommodating up to 200 people, as well as rehearsal and teaching rooms. This additional funding takes the Scottish Government's total support to the project of £5.75 million. Mr Swinney made the funding announcement ahead of the Convention of the Highlands and Islands. He said, "I am delighted to announce the additional funding for such an important project that is already hugely popular amongst local residents. The new facilities will provide further employment, educational and social opportunities for the island, attract high-calibre touring events, and crucially, help increase the number of people learning Gaelic. It is fitting that the Centre will be hosting the Convention of the Highlands and Islands, a vibrant forum that enables the Scottish Government, member organisations and businesses to discuss local issues and to find ways of ensuring that the region continues to flourish. It has been an enormous privilege for me to chair every convention of the Highlands and Islands for the last 16 years. I have greatly valued the opportunity to engage with communities and public authorities across the Highlands and the Islands and to ensure important issues raised at the convention are addressed at the very heart of government in Scotland. I am indebted, he said, to everyone who has contributed to this effective partnership over these years." So, Maureen, Mr Swinney said the new facilities will provide further employment, educational and social opportunities for the island, attract high-calibre touring events, and crucially help increase the number of people learning Gaelic. Each and all of those things sound like positive things, don't they?
Absolutely. And I think before we discuss in particular terms, it's really interesting to note that John Swinney has chaired every single meeting of the Convention of the Highlands and Islands. And I think that's testament to what the government has done over the years in making sure that legislation has been island-proofed, and that our proponents will keep saying that the SNP government is Central Belt focused. And I think that what John Swinney has done in chairing every single meeting, he could quite easily have found other more important things to do in his diary, but it shows the commitment of the Scottish Government over the years to the Highlands and Islands. I've visited South Uist. It is, I'm sure I'm right in saying, a community buyout of most of South Uist, if not at all, and that has been, another example of how land reform and the Scottish Government helping communities buy out the land and their community has been positive for the inhabitants of the islands, and they have just gone from strength to strength. And this is another example of how, when a community is given the power and responsibility to make decisions for itself, it can really grow and go forward. It will be really important for not only the community itself, but also, as you say, Andrew, for people visiting the community to see the culture and the life of the islands while they're there. And, I really welcome that, and I hope I get a chance to go and visit.
Thanks, Maureen. That's a very good point. I think you're right in saying that South Uist is now community owned. I think it was a buyout from the South Uist estate in 2018, I think, and it's about 94,000 acres of South Uist and Eriskay. But one other thing that I was going to ask you about was that the challenge, particularly in the Highlands and Islands at the moment, is to replace the EU funding, which has been taken away by Brexit and has not been replaced by the Tory government. So is this funding today, is it also an example of the Scottish government mitigating more and more of the damage done by Westminster, and in particular on this occasion by the Brexiteers?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure that I've seen recent figures of how much we're missing out of in terms of EU funding. But, how many times have you gone around the Highlands and Islands to see signs saying this is funded by the Scottish government and European funds? There's no way that the Scottish government, with its fixed budget, can make any big dent on the gap that has been created by the lack of EU funding. But it's good to see that small amounts can help in a big way, perhaps.
Thanks, Maureen. That's really helpful, and yes, I think the point about Gaelic education in particular in South Uist, it's being pointed out to me that when the community trust that bought out South Uist Estate certainly a couple of years ago, none of the employees of the community trust spoke Gaelic, either as native speakers or as having learned it. So it's clear that investment on South Uist and elsewhere in the language and the culture that goes with it is going to be really important. So that's to be encouraged. Well, maybe I'll have to make a trip to South Uist and we can broadcast from there sometime in the summer. That would be a very welcome expedition, I would say. But anyway, Maureen, thank you, because I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 in order that we can continue to pay the bills. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, and you can also find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Now, we will be back tomorrow evening at 7 for the next edition of Scotland at 7. So please come back and join us then. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening, and I would like to give particular thanks to our very special guest for this evening, Maureen Watt. Thanks, Maureen.
Thanks. Bye.
Today in 1883 saw the death at Windsor Castle of John Brown, the servant, friend, and possibly second husband of Queen Victoria. As I say, I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening. I'm away to watch or read something with the big yin in it. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.